If public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid cloud is confusing for you, we are going to talk about that in this episode. If serverless is exciting for you, stay till the end of the conversation. We are going to make some interesting announcement that's coming up in the industry regarding serverless. Let's get started. Welcome to the Modern Enterprise Tech Show. This is Krish Subramanian from Rishi.Research. Every week we talk about some of the hot topics in the industry, and today we are going to talk about distributed infrastructure. I have with me John Cohen, who is CEO of EdgeX. He is going to join us discussing about distributed infrastructure, serverless, and more. John, welcome to the show. Can you talk about yourself, talk about what EdgeX is doing, and then let's get going?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Krish. It's good to be on the show. I'm John Cowan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of EdgeX, where we are building the world's largest distributed cloud services platform at the edge for developers building everything from industrial IoT, urban IoT type solutions for the world of connected things.
Awesome. I think this episode is going to be interesting from that context. There has been quite a bit of talk about public clouds, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, then hybrid multi-cloud. You name any term with cloud on it, that becomes the point of discussion. And we are in 2020, and people are still talking about public cloud versus private cloud. I think that's meaningless. I think with the edge computing coming into picture, I think we are going beyond giving importance to infrastructure. I'm not saying infrastructure doesn't matter. I think infrastructure will be there. It doesn't matter whether we are taking virtual machines and containers from the cloud, or it is something that's running on the edge network, or even maybe across multiple cloud providers. If your application needs a certain type of infrastructure, you go with it. You don't care whether it's a single cloud provider or it's distributed everywhere. Just go with what your application needs. That's my thinking. And because of this thinking, which has evolved over a period of time, I sort of got attached to what Rob Hirschfield, CEO of Racken, told. We should not use the term public cloud, private cloud, multi-cloud, etc. Yes. We should rather use the term distributed infrastructure. The infrastructure exists underneath, and cloud is about giving some abstraction and removing the complexities. If that is the case, why can't we just take it all the way up and put an abstraction at the developer level so that developers can just deploy their applications onto the cloud without worrying about handling anything? I think in 2012-13 timeframe, we talked about PaaS, and now serverless is becoming interesting. I think we have a lot to talk about distributed infrastructure and how serverless fits in. John, what's your take on it?
Well, I think that talking about infrastructure, in the context of developers, would be like automobile drivers talking about asphalt or pavement. It's really that kind of analogy where, as the driver, I really don't care about, the road necessarily. Sure, do I care about potholes and do I care about distance and all that? Yeah, absolutely I do. But I take for granted, as I should, that there is something underneath my tires, so to speak, as I'm hurtling down the road. That's what infrastructure needs to become in the conversation around, cloud and development and what have you. Our perspective on where infrastructure is going for developers is really about eliminating friction, right? So we can talk about hybrid cloud or multi-cloud or all these kinds of terms and what have you. And for the record, I think hybrid cloud was a marketing term developed by large companies that lost the cloud war to Amazon.com or Amazon Web Services. But monikers and marketing terms aside, I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is eliminating friction for developers in being able to write, test, and push planet scale code, planet scale apps and data. And so Serverless is that. That's what serverless is, as we view it for the developer ecosystem. I likened it to the difference between going into a bank to conduct your business versus using online banking, right? So yes, absolutely. You can get in a car, drive 5 miles to your local bank, wait in line, talk to a human being, get back in your car and go back home. But all of that adds overhead or friction to your day. Why not just log on and do your banking via an internet browser? That's what serverless means, in the context of being able to rapidly write, test, and push code and data to whatever platform that you happen to be running on.
Yeah, before we dig deeply into serverless, I want to talk about the underlying infrastructure first. In 2009, I wrote a blog post about P2P cloud, and you also have similar ideas. And I think the cloud computing as it exists today, where there is a centralized cloud somewhere up there, and then the applications running there are sort of accessed by multiple devices, maybe it's a desktop or a mobile or some other form factor. So it was more like a client server model. That is my thinking. At the time in 2009, we had mobile phones gaining a lot of traction, and they had a lot of compute facility, which I think was unused, and that's why I was talking about P2P kind of a model. But now with IoT and edge computing coming into the mixture, I think the way we even think about the infrastructure changes from a more like a centralized cloud approach to a more distributed P2P cloud kind of an approach. What is your thinking on this?
Well, I mean, yeah, so that's a really good summary, Krish. The history of computing has been a constant pendulum swinging between centralized and decentralized architectures, right? Mainframes, highly centralized compute as a service, gave way to the client server era, in which every business of any size and shape and form could have its own server in its own broom closet, so to speak. And the explosion of the third generation of the internet gave us cloud computing, where any rank and file startup could have at its behest the power and scale of Amazon Web Services or Microsoft or Google, et cetera, on a highly centralized basis. And the Internet of Things is the era of the internet in which that pendulum swings back to a decentralized architecture. And that has everything to do with the fact that computing, high performance computing, needs to be located in close proximity to the fourth generation internet users, because it's not you and me, Krish. The fourth generation is going to be about machines consuming resources to do autonomous things, to do automation, to do predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, the plethora of new apps, if you will, that kind of make up the next generation of the internet. And those users, if you will, not only do they number in the high billions to trillions over the next 10 years, but they will require compute located in proximity in order to process information in near real time to do the things that we're going to expect them to do. Some folks I've talked to said, we can still use public cloud for that because, latency matters, but not that much. And I'm like, look, at the end of the day, here's the difference. The difference is that the applications of the future are not about me going online and making a couple of clicks on Facebook or a couple of clicks to, pay a bill online or those kinds of things. The fourth generation of the internet is going to be about, my car hurtling down the road by itself and needing to tell the difference between a pylon and a pedestrian. Can you really live with the kind of latency at scale with millions of cars doing that simultaneously across high density intersections? Can you rely on that latency to not kill people, to put it bluntly? And the short answer is no. You're going to need the cloud to exist in very close proximity to where those machines are when they require it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. In fact, latency is definitely a big driver for this kind of a distributed infrastructure. But I also think that not everyone wants to store all the data. So if I don't want to store my data beyond just the initial processing, why am I going to send it all the way to cloud and store it there and pay a lot more for not only the network bandwidth, but also for storage? I think from the latency point of view, which is a critical thing in terms of driving the user experience, and also from a security point of view, also the latency becomes very important. But at the same, also you don't want to keep the data forever. Like some data you can just process it and dispose it off. In such cases, also you don't want to move the data all the way to cloud, and you want to take the compute closer to cloud where the data is generated and handle everything. So with this, I totally see that distributed infrastructure is going to be a critical thing in the future. But it adds a lot of complexities. One is the operational complexity, and second, even for developers, deploying applications is going to be a problem. So we need to sort of solve these issues, like solve the operational complexity of managing all the infrastructure, and more importantly, we need to make sure that we empower the developers by giving the right abstraction for them to deploy the application. And the fact that the future of how the future applications are going to be more disposable. It's not just the infrastructure that's disposable, even the applications are going to be disposable. So yes, if you have to write such small functions that do a particular task at the edge and probably get rid of the application itself, then probably serverless is the right abstraction for that. How does serverless fit into the edge computing world, or in this distributed world? How does serverless fit in?
So the important thing to recognize why serverless is such a fantastic coupling or pairing with edge and IoT is because serverless by nature is distributed. So, James Thomason, my co-founder, and I, we dreamt about this a couple of years ago, which is why we started EdgeX. We said, why is it so complicated? Why is it so complex to build planet scale applications? It's extremely difficult. As developers, I don't know a single developer except for the ones that like to tinker, to use James's quote from his presentation at Edge Computing World. But aside from the developers that really like to tinker with infrastructure, I don't know a single developer that wants to have to spend a bunch of time wrangling orchestrators, right? I mean, every minute that I have to spend thinking about provisioning and orchestration and endpoints and all that kind of stuff is time I'm not spending writing code, which is what drives value either for my enterprise IoT project or my startup or what have you. So, from our perspective, it's really about trying to take the complexity out of things for developers in terms of the velocity at which decentralized applications written in a serverless framework can be pushed to a global network.
Yeah, I know you are going to make some talk about an announcement you recently made, but before we go there, I want to understand what kind of use cases does having serverless distributed across at the planet scale actually solve? Like, can you list out some of the use cases where this plays a critical role?
Yeah, so I'll describe one without mentioning certain names. I'll describe a couple of things I think are kind of fascinating. So today, machine learning systems exist to do fascinating things like audio and acoustic analysis for something like a gunshot. Okay. We as the industry can do fascinating things as post-mortem analysis. We have partners and customers with technology that can tell the difference between the kind of firearm that was fired and the proximal distance from the audio sensor and what have you. Really, really insightful analytics on, say, something like a gunshot. But what's very difficult to do is apply those learning models in real time such that the inference can be impactful to whoever it needs to be informed about that information. Let's just say a first responder or a police officer of some kind or a soldier of some kind. Telling the difference between a firecracker and an AK-47, for example, can mean the difference between a civilian life or a police officer's life lost. Those are the kinds of things that serverless at edge, where you're able to process information in real time and be able to, say, for instance, display on a heads up, like on a mobile phone, or example, or a tablet of some kind, the results of real-time analysis to inform, say, threat response, as just one example. But that's just, that's one, because people, I think those kinds of solutions are going to be important, as we kind of move forward as a society, and it's kind of top of mind for a lot of folks. But there are plenty of others in the intelligent traffic system space. How cars are interacting with traffic control systems and pedestrians and cyclists and emergency response vehicles. All of that becomes super important as we look to the Internet of Things, if you will.
Awesome. This sort of brings us to the announcement you folks made at the Edge Computing World Conference this week. I attended James's keynote and demo on the first day. So can you talk about the announcement EdgeX made, and probably talk about how it is important from the point of view of enterprises modernizing themselves to take advantage of Edge and IoT?
Yeah, so we made a few different announcements. We released the first commercial version of our platform. So, the EdgeX network, the distributed cloud services at the edge, is a real thing. Like, we used to, you and I used to get together and talk about this stuff a few years ago as, man, can you imagine if and when this happens? Well, yesterday's announcement from us was that it's here, that you can begin to use it. And so that was an important announcement. We increased our funding by another $3 million, and we also added a peer of ours, yours and mine, Joe Weinman, to our advisory board. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Joe. Have loved collaborating with him at arm's length over the last decade plus, as one of the foremost thought leaders in cloud and now fog computing or edge computing. And so it's been fun to work with him in the last several months, collaborating around different ideas that culminated in him formally joining our team. So that was part of our announcement. And then, the other sort of subsequent announcement we made was around a concept that we called EdgeBlock. And EdgeBlock is the result of a collaboration between our company, EdgeX, Virtual Power Systems, which is now led by Dean Nelson, who is also an advisor to EdgeX, and IT Renew, which is a company run by a fantastic thought leader, Ali Fenn. And IT Renew basically has the capability of taking infrastructure out of hyperscale data center environments that's anywhere from a year to 3 years old, and they have the ability to remanufacture that into something else. And so we got together and said, well, the edge, if you think about how much infrastructure has to exist at scale to meet processing demands, is going to be extremely expensive for customers to roll out. At retail price for infrastructure, it's not tenable. But even worse than that, the amount of infrastructure that has to be manufactured to satisfy the needs at the edge can only mean bad things for the planet. And so, we thought, what if we could actually put together a fully integrated edge server, which we call EdgeBlock, that's entirely made out of recycled server and storage infrastructure from hyperscalers, and it's plug and play, ready to go. But for the cost conscious, I'm Canadian, so I can say this: for the cost conscious, we can do it for less than half the cost of buying net new infrastructure with full warranty support. We think that's a pretty big deal because, part of the cruft or the friction in building your IoT project out is figuring out first, before I even build an IoT app, how am I going to deliver infrastructure and cloud services, whether it's at the factory floor or the natural gas well in the middle of West Texas, or my unmanned wiring cabinet in my commercial real estate building or my shopping mall, as an example. How am I going to actually build that infrastructure out and deliver cloud services before I even build my apps? Well, what we've done is kind of shorten that gap with EdgeBlock. It's a simple point, click, deploy, plug and play, cloud delivered where you need it, when you need it for your developers.
Awesome. I think I'm looking forward to seeing how that takes off, because the cost is a very important factor as people think about using edge computing in their organization. And by recycling the servers, you're playing your play is somewhat interesting to me. let's see how it shapes up. And
Krish, what we have a form factor that'll run on 110 volt power and requires no active air conditioning. So you know what? I'm going to ship you one, and you're going to plug it into that home office of yours, and you will be part of the distributed edge.
Awesome. I do that. In fact, that was going to be my follow-up question. I was about to ask you how low a power we can go with these hyperconverged servers. So you already answered that.
Yeah.
So if someone has to find more information about your company and the platform, what are your coordinates?
Yeah, EdgeX.io, EdjX.io is always a good starting point. There'll be lots of documentation, lots of things to read and learn about, and reach out to us. We're happy to connect and get you onto the platform if you're a developer, or help you accelerate your IoT infrastructure project by getting you some edge blocks to build around.
Awesome. Great. It was a great conversation. And did you notice what I did for the background? I know you were coming to the show. That's why I sort of thought I'll put a beach picture for the background.
Yeah, I'm Canadian, but my heart is always in the Caribbean, having spent nearly 12 years there. So I appreciate you playing to my strengths there, Krish.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks for being in the show. It was great having you. And looking forward to having you in the future so that we can take stock on how EdgeX is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks for having me, Krish. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah. This was a great conversation with John on distributed infrastructure and how serverless can fit in and take away some of the complexities developers will face with such distributed infrastructure. Next week, we are going to continue on the serverless mode and talk to the Knative community on what they're doing. So if you are interested in listening to what is happening in the Knative community, and also want to learn more about their governance model, which they announced recently, check out Modern Enterprise Tech Show virtual panel next week at the same time at 1 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday. Check out that show. It's going to be interesting. You can also watch the show at live.rishi.tv. Till next week, thank you very much. This is Krish Subramanian from Rishi.Research.